Think we are live. Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to my channel, Hamza Saada. Today, we are going to be doing something a little different. We are not going to be doing the regular. We're going to be interviewing presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein. Dr. Jill Stein, thank you so much for being here with me today.
My honor. It's really great to be with you, Hamza. I'm looking forward to talking.
Of course. Dr. Jill Stein is a distinguished physician, having received her MD from Harvard Medical School, where she studied the relationships between people's health and toxic exposures in the environment. It was her time as a medical student and practicing physician that led her down the path of environmental and political activism, supporting many different local initiatives and grassroots political campaigns combating environmental injustice. Her advocacy and leadership eventually led her to the local political stage with grassroots campaigns in Massachusetts, as well as the national stage where she launched bids for the presidency in 2012, 2016, and now 2024 as the Green Party's presidential nominee. Her platform, simply put, is best shown in her campaign slogan, People, Planet, Peace. Stein supports universal health care, climate action, economic equality, peace, human rights, and any policy that supports a brighter future. I've had the pleasure of speaking to her briefly just a few days ago with Maya and again today, so I just want to warmly welcome Dr. Stein, Dr. Jill Stein, to the stream. Thank you so much for coming. First, how are you? How are you doing today?
Great. I'm just back home, actually, after about 5 weeks on the road,
Yeah.
just talking to people. And there's an uprising out there in full swing, and it's really inspiring and moving to be talking to people at this incredible crisis moment in virtually every dimension of our lives, and including the genocide that we're seeing bloody our screens every day, every hour. And it's just a real kind of breaking point moment. It's a time of incredible personal and social and political change.
100%, 100%. And seriously, thank you so much for all you do. I mean, what you're doing is truly amazing. I think so. Just a basic opening question for those watching who are unfamiliar with who you are. But can you please give a quick rundown of who you are and what the Green Party is?
Sure. So I describe myself as a mother on fire, working to make the world safe for children, all children. I was trained and practiced professionally as a medical doctor for about 25 years. And very early on in that process, I really saw that, our health as individuals and as society isn't created in the doctor's office. And in fact, once you're sick, there's not a whole lot that happens. I mean, there's very important care, of course, from the doctor's office. But if you really want a cure, an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. So I became involved at the level of communities to try to clean up our air and our water and have a healthy food supply and deal with food deserts and poverty, which is like the #4 killer in this country, and jobs and housing. And then ultimately I just saw how much in every instance people at the community level would be working on something, and then our elected officials would be working with the cause of the problem, with the big pharma or the health insurance industry or big real estate, big oil, you name it. The problems that people are struggling with, our elected officials would not be on the side of the people. And so basically I got tricked into running for office a long time ago, in 2000 actually,
Mhm.
where I ran for governor in Massachusetts, and discovered that there's a very different political world out there once you get outside of the parties of War and
Yeah.
Wall Street,
Yeah.
once you get outside of the big corporate scene. So, the Green Party is basically a party that's of, by, and for the people. And we don't take corporate money. We don't take big money. We don't work with super PACs or even allow super PACs, which are basically huge, loopholes for billionaires to throw as much money as they want into our very corrupt political process, which is bought and paid for in this country. And the policies that we have are basically the policies that the lobbyists and the big campaign donors want. So the Green Party is the opposite of that. We are a party of, by, and for the people. We are a pro-worker party. We are a pro-environment, healthcare as a human right, the right to a job, the right to an income above the poverty level, a right to affordable housing. So
Yeah.
we basically have an economic bill of rights and a program for emergency response to this climate crisis that we're in right now. And we support a foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy. We've very much been in opposition to empire for a long,
Yeah.
long time.
Sorry, 1 second. Mark, do you think you can turn your camera back on? Just so, okay. Well, I think just because it got a little messy. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, I don't know what's there. I think. Sorry, 1 second. Technical difficulties. We'll be right back. Stream one. Okay. Okay, we're back. We're back. We're back. Sorry about that, stream. We're back. Cool. Sorry. So sorry about that. So sorry about that. You can continue. My bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just kind of, explaining how I got to be here, sort of being an apolitical person for most of my life, and you all out there are way ahead of me. I didn't get political to really fight with the political process. I didn't join the political process. I joined the fight against
Yeah.
the process, the very corrupt political process. And I didn't do that until I was age 50. And I did it kicking and screaming because I
Yeah.
saw everything else failed. And if you don't fight back against the political process, all hope is lost. And I relate a lot to the words of Frederick Douglass, the amazing, famous abolitionist, who said that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. And you have to engage the political system, if only to make a demand of what we want and to be willing to fight for what we want and not to buy into the lesser evil, which is a way of silencing our demand, and
Yeah.
kind of disappearing behind the so-called lesser evil. But we're now in an era where we have two greater evils, because how can you be the lesser evil if you are leading the charge in a genocide and leading, the assault on our democracy here at home by way of really suppressing free speech, of criminalizing speech, actually criminalizing the right to protest and petition for redress of grievances. These are essential foundations of our democracy. And Joe Biden and the Democrats are leading the charge in the assault here. That's not to say that the Republicans are innocent, but we can no longer say that the Democrats are the lesser evil. We have two greater evil parties. So our approach in the Green Party is to say, forget the lesser evil, fight for the greater good, like our lives depend on it, because in fact they do.
100%. I think people need to realize that, Trump or Biden they're not the only options here, and, thank you so much for that rundown. I mean, personally, I wasn't familiar with your campaign and the Green Party until fairly recently. And it's funny because I was basically asking, myself why there isn't a candidate or party that stands for these values. And you're right here. You touched a bit on PACs and super PACs. Your campaign and the Green Party in general is very clear about not accepting donations from corporations, PACs, lobbyists, etc. I mean, you touched on that a little bit. What does it mean to be a grassroots movement, and what are your opinions about the power of the lobbyists and the influence they have over American politics?
Yeah, we have the best democracy that money can buy, which is no
Hmm.
democracy at all. There's a famous saying um, from a Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, of many decades ago, which is that we have a choice in this country between vast concentrations of wealth or a democracy. And we've chosen vast concentrations of wealth, which in fact gets more and more concentrated all the time, to where now three billionaires, the three richest Americans, have as much money and wealth as the lower 50% of the population. And Democrats and Republicans, they have a system with these huge loopholes. So they don't follow the everyday rules of campaign finance. They have their own loopholes so that a single donor can write a check for $600,000.
Yeah.
And it basically gets laundered back into the presidential campaign and either the DNC or the RNC, the Democratic National Committee, or the Republican, where, that donor then takes on incredible importance, and that donor can pull the strings from the inside. And if I think most people know how corrupt government is and have really given up on the process and are kind of at war, either overtly or covertly, with our political process. But there have been actual studies that document this stuff. And there was a very famous study done about 12 years ago by two authors, Gillens and Page, who were from Northwestern University and Princeton. And they did this exhaustive, deep study of what policies pass and who is behind them. And surprise, surprise, it's not the public and it's not public interest groups. It's entirely big money. Big money
Yeah.
dictates our congressional agenda, and the same in our state houses as well. It's the same process. They've also been mostly hijacked, so that there's almost a 0% relationship between what we, the people, desperately and urgently need. Right now, 63% roughly of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. You have half of renters who are severely stressed just trying to make their monthly rent and paying over 30%. That's like the
Yeah.
the technical criteria for being severely economically stressed by your rent. Eviction rates are off the charts. Homelessness as the highest on record. Child poverty doubled in the last couple of years. We're just seeing people in incredible struggles. So they know that our government is not serving us. So we've completely lost faith and confidence in our government. This has everything to do with lobbyists and donors. Lobbyists go in there and they are quote, educating our elected officials, educating them with basically the propaganda, or they write the bills. Often they actually write the bills,
Yeah.
the legislation that they then want Congress to pass. And where they get their power is that the lobbyists convey campaign contributions. So it's like they present the bribes from these industries, legalized, but still bribes,
Yeah.
legalized within a very corrupt system of laws that allow interests, special interests, corporations and billionaires and bankers and big fossil fuel and big oil and big pharma, you know, those with very deep pockets have the money to throw around and buy policy. That's what gets us where they are. And one of the things they buy, among other things, is dedicated tax giveaways for
Yeah.
for the wealthy, so that the wealthy have all the more money and power to keep purchasing even more policies that favor them. So, everyday people, life is really a struggle, and people only survive now because they live in debt. People live in debt, whether it's credit card debt or mortgage debt or medical debt, um, student debt. Debt is like how we live here in this economy. And it's great for the upper 5%, 10%, but for most people, it's really a struggle. And
Hmm.
then the other side of this is that that money and influence buys these horrific foreign policies, which are basically that of an empire, which is really good if you are the weapons manufacturer. If you are the war profiteers, we supposedly were pulling out of Afghanistan a couple of years ago, and this was going to be like the big peace dividend. And what happened? The minute Afghanistan kind of wound down, then suddenly Ukraine was ginned up, and we had another
Yeah.
war to fight in Ukraine. And then after that, then well, Gaza and the war on Palestine by Israel and,
Yeah.
ginning up this so-called pivot to Asia, which has been going on for some time, and the increased armaments and building, bases and militarizing, U.S. colonies essentially in Southeast Asia. And, this is where our dollars go. It's half of our congressional budget, which is being spent on the endless war machine. And what does that get us? Absolute disasters from Vietnam to Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya. It's just one Yemen, although, we haven't borne the bulk of that, but we've supplied a lot of the weapons and the support for Saudi Arabia's assault on
Yeah.
Yemen, which has been absolutely devastating. And millions upon millions of lives are lost. The United States now, not only do we have 800 roughly bases around the world, I used to think, oh, that's what everybody does. No, it's not. We're the only ones. The next biggest number of military bases is actually Russia, that has about 30, and we're at 800, so it's absolutely nuts. And in addition to that, we are conducting so-called anti-terror operations in
Hmm.
this 85 countries around the world. War is how we roll in this country, in a way where the American people basically know nothing about this, except that it's draining our public resources. In fact, the average cost, to the American household this year alone has been $12,000 to keep this incredible war machine going, this endless war machine. And if you add it up since the, post 9/11 wars, it's been roughly $55,000 per household. Imagine what you could do with that. We should have a war tax, a dedicated war tax, instead of taking it out of our general income tax. That way, the American people would know exactly what we are paying and what it's for. Right now, it's all just disappeared, into the tax base, so people don't know, which is why, that's why I'm running. That's why the Greens are in this presidential race, because
Hmm.
if we're not, there's no voice really to really clarify what's going on. And that's why we're fighting to get on every ballot across the country. Because once we're on every ballot, we're now on the ballot for the majority of voters, but we want to be on for all voters. You have to do that if you're really going to challenge empire, because
Yeah.
otherwise, if you're not on every ballot, they will just write you off and not give you the time of day, and they'll have an excuse to basically not cover you in the mainstream media and so on. So we're encouraging people, if you want to see a pro-worker, anti-war, anti-genocide, climate emergency campaign that will also, promote affordable housing, rent control across the country, will promote healthcare as a human right, free public higher education, bailing out the students, ending student debt. We bailed out the crooks on Wall Street when they crashed the economy. It's about time to bail out the victims of that waste, fraud, and abuse on Wall Street. So this is what our campaign is about. We will be the only such campaign. That's why we're encouraging people to go to my website, which is jillstein2024.com, and help us get on the ballot, help us fight this fight, join the ballot drives, which
Yeah.
is just everyday people carrying those petitioners. We have to collect 25,000 signatures in Illinois in the next week.
Wow.
And then we have about 10 days to complete 37,000 signatures in Illinois.
Wow.
They create these outrageous requirements in order to keep their competition off the ballot. Because if we're not on the ballot, you won't be covered and the truth will not be told. If we're on the ballot, then then we've got the megaphone.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's very scary seeing the power that money has over the political process of the US. I mean, money plays a role, like you said, in big corporations, PACs, lobbyists like APAC, foreign interests, empire interests, capitalist interests. I mean, it's all money at the end of the day, right? Lobbying is, like you said, legalized bribery. Legalized bribery. It's very unfortunate, but it's also refreshing that there's someone like you running for the presidency with this stance, having a grassroots campaign, literally fueled by individual donors, real people. Like you said, your campaign is for the people, by the people. Which is amazing. And I wanted to talk about the actual voting process for a bit. The U.S. has historically been a two-party system, and each election has been more polarizing than the last, right? The Green Party is considered a third party, and statistically speaking, any third party or independent candidate is fighting an uphill battle, right? I think this entire system is really a symptom of how the U.S. conducts its elections and voting. I wanted to ask, does your platform endorse any reforms to the voting process, such as introducing ranked choice voting or approval voting? Do you support one over the other? And also, if you can explain those terms for the audience, that would be great.
So ranked choice voting is a voting system that breaks up the monopoly of the two big parties.
Hmm.
And it creates a multi-partisan democracy. And it makes it really easy for the parties to collaborate and for candidates to work together. Um, and how it works is that instead of just voting for one person, like for president, you can vote, you can rank your choices. And you have a first choice, who's your preferred, and it might be an underdog. And your second choice might be kind of your compromise candidate, a candidate you think maybe has a better chance of getting in. And then you may not want to vote for more than that. You could technically vote for the third and fourth, et cetera. But if
Yeah.
there's only two candidates you want, you list those two. And that way, if your first choice um, is eliminated, if nobody gets to a majority in the first count, then there's like a runoff that takes place instantly. And to make it really simple, if your first choice loses, your vote is automatically then reassigned to your second choice. So you never have to worry, oh, I'm throwing away my vote on someone who can't win. It allows you the freedom to actually vote based on your values, based on what you want. And you never have to worry, oh, my vote went to an underdog who couldn't win. No, you get to actually vote based on your values, which is what you have to do in a democracy.
Yeah.
Democracy needs values, it needs a moral compass. And if we're always hiding our values based on second guessing the system and how you think the votes are going to get split and who you think is going to win, we never get to drive our democracy forward based on our vision and our values. So ranked choice voting, it gets rid of, that my vote wouldn't count. It also gets rid of that, oh my goodness, I might help the candidate that I hate. If I vote, for the underdog, if I vote green, does that mean then that Donald Trump will win if Donald Trump is your biggest fear?
Yeah.
You may want to give your vote to the so-called lesser evil. So it basically takes the fear and the second guessing out of voting. And what's left is your values. You
Yeah.
get to vote based on your values, and you get to vote, here's my preferred candidate, the one I want, here's my second choice. And there are other variations on this. But the advantage of ranked choice voting, that system, is that it's been used a lot of places all around the world. There are always, little pros and cons of voting systems. There's another called preference voting where you can list, I think this is the one where you can list all the candidates that you would find acceptable. And
Yeah.
then all those candidates are counted up, and there's another way to kind of calculate who the winner would be, uh, considering all those preference votes of everyone who votes. That's not a system that's actually been used, um, certainly not used broadly. So its quirks are not particularly well understood. That's the advantage to ranked choice voting, is that it completely gets rid of the spoiler fear. It eliminates spoiled elections. It eliminates throwing away my vote. And it makes sure that nobody wins unless they can get to a majority through a majority of support from voters, which is really good. So that way, the winner is not the outcome of some, happenstance, like how many progressives might be running and splitting the vote. of progressives. It
Yeah.
completely gets rid of that because progressives can basically trade off votes, between first and second choices and so on. So it's a really
Yeah.
great voting system. And we should have that. There are a lot of states. Well, actually, the state of Maine has adopted it. The state of Washington has a vote this November to adopt it. And something around 25 or 30 major cities, including New York City, Portland, uh, Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine, and lots of countries and lots of cities in between have adopted it, and it's very helpful. It's
Yeah.
very
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, to me, that sounds like the ideal way to vote. I mean, it can help us move away from the two-party system since it hasn't been working at all. I mean, I remember in 2016 when people were saying, "Oh, I don't like Hillary, but she's the lesser evil." Same story in 2020. Same story in 2024. Is that how it's going to be for the future? You know what I mean? I support voting reform because I mean politics is nuanced, and I shouldn't be forced to pick a candidate who I don't prefer just because they might be less terrible than the other. I wanted to, I mean, it just doesn't like there's more than just picking from two evil groups of people. Um, but yeah, no, 100%. Thank you so much for that answer. I wanted to touch on healthcare for a bit. Your real introduction to advocacy has been in the context of the environment and public health. I was hoping that you could highlight the key points in your platform that address those areas. Are there any specific issues that the country is facing today?
Oh, huge. I mean, uh, for one thing, people don't have access to health care. It's like 87 million Americans who either don't have health insurance
Wow.
or they don't have full health insurance coverage.
Wow.
So, when you need to go to a doctor, you can't go because you're worried about the cost and it's not going to get covered. Or you need your insulin and you can't pay for it. Um, or other critical medicine you can't get
Mhm.
because the cost is just off the charts. And so this reform, one reform, so I so-called Medicare for all healthcare system. It's like Medicare uh, before they started knocking holes in Medicare. So they have all kinds of holes in Medicare right now, but it
Yeah.
like restores Medicare to the system that most people were extremely happy with, a system where like the bureaucracy costs about 3%. The bureaucracy in the healthcare system that we have now, it's huge. If you've ever, had to submit,
Yeah.
for reimbursements or figure out what a health insurance plan you're going to have, or what does your health plan even cover? It's just outrageous. I mean, even just like a pharmacy plan, it's incredible
Yeah.
trying to keep up with the red tape. It turns out that it's one out of every three healthcare dollars pays into this incredibly complicated morass of private for-profit healthcare. And in the system of Medicare, you just have one insurer instead of a gazillion insurers, each of which have many different policies. And then it becomes this whole rat race to try to chase down, well, was that medicine covered? Did you go into the hospital and did you get a Band-Aid? Are Band-Aids covered? It's just this mess of trying to track this minutia and figure out what
Yeah.
does it cost. In a Medicare for all system, there's just one basically quasi-governmental insurer. But the healthcare itself is the same. It's still your doctor if you want that doctor. But now you have a choice. If you don't want that doctor, you can choose your doctor
Yeah.
and your hospital and all
Yeah.
that. Because under most insurance plans right now, you don't have choices at all. You're inside of narrow networks, and those networks change. And then you got to change the healthcare provider that you've had a 10-year, 15-year relationship and they know you. So yeah, the healthcare system is a mess, but it's really easy to fix through this Medicare for all system. Most countries around the world use, that is developed countries, they provide health insurance to everyone as a human right for way less than us. We cost twice as much as the next biggest spender, which is
Yeah.
Canada. And they have much better health statistics than we do. Ours are terrible for all kinds of reasons, but including that people don't have ready access to healthcare. So let me just say that's one problem is our healthcare system. It serves health insurance companies and big pharma,
Yeah.
doesn't serve people. And then the other issue is that we're sick. We
Hmm.
are really darn sick. We have the worst health statistics of all the developed nations. And in part, that's because we have a lot of poverty. We also have a lot of pollution. Um, we also, have lousy housing, and that's very much related to, health. Um, there are just all kinds of things that don't work well in our society, and they make us sick.
Yeah.
And, the environment is a big part of that. We have kind of a society that's built for these predatory industries, whether it's fossil fuel, our energy system, our food system is run for the benefit and the profits of corporations. Farmers have been put out of business. Uh, you
Yeah.
know, massively as an entire class of people. Most farms have been corporatized. It's a real struggle for farmers to exist right now. And the system of food production is really lousy. It's devastating to our water supplies and to the soil itself. It relies on toxic chemicals, which are, you know, poisoning the farmers, poisoning our food. Um, we can do this much better.
Hmm.
It's not rocket science how to do that,
Yeah.
but that's very much related to our health problems is that we're not protecting health. In fact, our systems are making people sick.
Yeah.
So we have this very this kind of pathological, this sickening system of food. Our water supplies are lousy, our air is polluted. um, just across the board, we have really these lousy determinants. And then there's also, poverty and social chaos and stuff like that, which, joblessness, losing your job is a huge driver of illness. And a lot of people have basically lost good jobs over the last 20 years. Many jobs are, they're exported, and then the jobs that we have are, lousy and part-time or
Yeah.
just really very stressful working conditions. So these are fixable problems. These are not like some kind of God-given thing that Americans are just sick. No, we are made sick fundamentally by our political system. I used to say that I practiced clinical medicine. Now I've moved into political medicine because
Yeah.
politics is the mother of all illnesses. And we all have to fight, you know, for our political health if we're going to be allowed to have healthy food and water and jobs and transportation and you name it. Right now, it's
Yeah.
all on behalf of the big predators, not the people. So there's a fundamental fix here, which is demanding that we have the democracy we deserve, and that means we have the choices that we deserve on the ballot that we can choose if we so desire in this election.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, no, I mean, I support Medicare for all 100%. Every other country has some sort of safety net that guarantees healthcare to their citizens. And the US shouldn't be, um, uh, you know, different, I guess. But if we have the money to fund genocide, then we can definitely fund our own health sector. It's like we're paying for Israel's. We're paying for Israel's, healthcare right now, and,
Well,
and we can't even like what's going on.
right.
I actually have a question from a friend of mine, cousin of mine, about some of what you just touched on. Her name is Rajat, and she's actually a pharmacist from Oklahoma. Um, you've mentioned that for years we've been seeing the rise in cost of prescription drugs, and she was wondering what changes would your administration bring to have more of a cost-effective way to negotiate drug prices between the pharmacy slash prescriber and insurance that would bring down healthcare costs for patients.
So this is one of the really great things about a Medicare for All system, because then all pharmaceuticals would be
Yeah.
subject to bulk purchasing.
Yeah.
So you would have this, this one insurer that would be buying pharmaceuticals for everyone. So then they have enormous clout to bargain down the cost of pharmaceuticals. Because right now, it's common for our medications to be at least twice as expensive as, say, in Canada or in Europe, but often it's like 10 times or 50 times more expensive. It's just absolutely outrageous. And the way we've
Yeah.
seen costs just skyrocket for really common medications like the inhalers that you use for asthma. The price of that has just shot up. And also like the those injections for like for
Uh,
anaphylactic,
yeah.
severe reactions and stuff like that. Those have absolutely gone through the roof. And it's not as though the components have gotten more expensive. It's just that, the drug companies have gotten more savvy about jacking up the price. So it's outrageous. And the Democrats, they pride themselves, they pat themselves on the back for passing this bulk purchasing bill. This is within the Inflation Reduction Act. It had some bulk purchasing built in. But the truth is, it's only 10 pharmaceuticals. It might be 15, but it's like some really tiny number, and there are thousands of them. There are thousands
Yeah.
of them. So it's really, that's not what the American people need. The American people are basically locked out of healthcare. There's somewhere around 70,000 deaths every year just from the lack of health insurance. And during COVID, one out of
Yeah.
every three COVID deaths, so like over 300,000 people died from not having the health insurance that would have enabled them to get proper care.
Yeah.
So, this is horrible. As Martin Luther King said, health injustice is like one of the worst forms of injustice, the most inhumane form of injustice at all. And, like to look at racial disparities in health as well.
Yeah.
It's somewhere around, I want to say 30% higher.
Hmm.
No, it's 3 years. Last I checked, which is a couple of years, but these
Yeah.
things, unfortunately, they're not getting better. So this would tell you roughly where we are. The health, the lifespan of African Americans is cut short on average by about 3 years. And then if
Wow.
you add to that the health impact of educational differences, not having like even a high school education or college education, if you add that along with racial disparities, it turns into more like a difference of 10 years, not 3 years. And like, how outrageous is that?
Yeah.
That people's lives are cut short. Same thing for maternal mortality or infant mortality. They are sky high among African Americans in particular and other people. This is partly related to income, but it's also separately just related to race alone, probably having to do with just, racial bias that's built into a healthcare system, which is delivered mostly by white people.
Yeah.
And, care needs to be delivered, um, you know, diversely. The provider, people who are providers need to be as diverse and of the racial and ethnic background as the patients in order to provide true quality care. So these are
Yeah.
fixable problems, and these are just hardwired into the system that we have, which is all about the profits of the industry. Oh, and one other thing about the cost. If we move to Medicare for all, we would save one out of every $3. So it doesn't cost us money. It actually saves us money. We'd be
Yeah.
saving $500 billion a year. So it makes it all the more outrageous and inexcusable that
Wow.
our current um, elected officials have chosen not to take care of our health and instead to allow us to die and suffer from chronic disease and needless illness when they could fix it, simply by changing the system. And it wouldn't cost us anything. It would, in fact, free up a lot of money for us to put into other things that we urgently need.
Yeah.
So it's such an indictment of the system that it is this way.
Yeah, no, it's really crazy how people in the US are struggling between buying food and buying medicine, you know? I mean, as you mentioned, the price of insulin, asthma inhalers, etc. I mean, so many common prescription drugs are extremely expensive. Unfortunately, this is all just the scratch of how broken and corrupt the healthcare system is in the US. So I agree, Medicare for all, 100%. I'm on board. There's also a growing shortage of physicians in the country, you know, so access to the primary care providers is absolutely vital. This was also asked by Rajat, by the way, and with your medical background in mind, do you have any opinions about bringing pharmacists into the fold with a provider status? I guess similar to nurse, physician assistants, as a means of bridging the gap in healthcare.
I would love to know more about that, and exactly what are the options? How could pharmacists be brought more into the fold? I mean, I know from my pharmacist friends that their work is very grueling and they've become widgets, in a corporate system, which is exploiting them, every bit as much as patients are being exploited. The work of pharmacists is very hard and very stressful, and there's a lot resting on what they do. And, it's important for them to have, uh, you know, jobs that are livable, that aren't burning them out and aren't making them feel really exploited, So I think
Yeah.
it's really important that the whole system change so it's not being run for maximum profit. And, I'd love to hear more about what, what pharmacists as a group need, to make it more sustainable and just for them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you so much for this. I think the discourse around healthcare is almost intentionally confusing so that the powerful can do whatever they want and raise the price of medicine and healthcare services, you know? So thank you so much for offering some insight into that area. I want to move on to the people part of your campaign. You're obviously aware, but to those watching, I just wanted to say that June 19th, this Wednesday, is Juneteenth, right? Which is the commemoration of the end of slavery in the US. You've been vocal about your support for reparations to the descendants of those who were enslaved, and that's just the tip of your initiative to facilitate Black liberation, right? I wanted to ask if you could expand on how your administration would address the issues faced by the Black American community today.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what the African American community faces is a kind of continuation of the hardships that have been inflicted on that community forever.
Yeah.
Um, Yesterday, in Birmingham, no, in Huntsville, Alabama. This is where we finished up our latest road trip. We had been in
Yeah.
Birmingham and then we were in Huntsville. And in Huntsville, uh, on Sunday morning, which was Father's Day, first we were at a mosque at a prayer service for Eid, and just being a part of that and sharing that celebration in the midst of this tragedy. And it was really heartfelt and wonderful and a real privilege to be there
Yeah.
and just feel how this weighs on the Muslim and the Arab American community,
Yeah.
to be celebrating, uh, even while carrying around this just sense of tragedy and sorrow in the presence of the genocide. And then right after that, we then went to a service at a church, an African church, the African Christian um, Methodist Episcopal Church, I think, if I have the name right, the
Hmm.
Phillips Church, uh, where the community was very focused on Father's Day and the struggle to keep Black families together in the presence of relentless economic hardship and the um, uh, just the struggle that's been imposed on that community for centuries in this country. And it was so touching and really moving to see how each of these communities were kind of struggling with genocide
Yeah.
um, in different ways. Um, and, you know, I'll just say that it brought home to me how much the African American community is struggling with the legacy of slavery. Slavery ended, but it also continued, not as slavery, but as other forms of economic hardship and really economic enslavement in many ways. So you had, slavery followed by sharecropping and lynching and Jim Crow, these horrible rules that locked out African American families from society and a means of supporting themselves and sustaining themselves. And then, and then you had the war on drugs and mass incarceration and the school to prison pipeline and redlining, all of which really prevented African Americans from having access to education and from having jobs and then having housing as a way to accumulate and grow family wealth. And um, to see, for one thing, to see how both communities, the Arab American and the African American communities, are each struggling in their own ways with incredible dignity and inspiration and
Yeah.
grounded in faith in different ways, different kinds of faith, and how they bring out the best in themselves to meet the struggle. And, so it reminded me how relentless the struggle of the African American community has been. And that's what our agenda is about. So it's about reparations. It's about paying a debt owed for having built this economy, which is what African Americans did. Through the Civil War, slavery was actually it was the stronghold of the American economy, both through the cotton economy and the sugar plantation economy, not to mention just actual physical construction, which was all borne by slaves. Oh, and tobacco was the other
Yeah.
part of it. These were all elements of the slave economy that was just the sweat, of the um, of the slaves. So reparations is not like a giveaway. It's
Yeah.
a debt owed that should be paid. And then, along with that, the other pieces of the agenda of the Black liberation agenda include ensuring that schools are funded, quality funding. We shouldn't have, a second class, quality schools because communities don't have money because their real estate doesn't bring in the same property tax. So we should have equitable funding across the board. Um, not to mention healthcare as a human right for everyone, quality jobs for everyone. So much of our economic justice platform applies here to the urgent needs of African Americans. But in addition, we insist that the anti-discrimination laws that exist be applied and that they be extended so that African Americans have access to housing, to healthcare, to jobs and to schooling without discrimination and restrictions.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things, and I, encourage people to go to our website, jillstein2024.com, and just go to the platform drop-down menu, and you can see all of this in great detail. We're also talking about ending the mass incarceration, which has been especially hard on African Americans, police violence, especially hard on African Americans. Encounters with police are about triple, the rate of the Caucasian population.
Wow.
Incarceration takes place at about 3 times the rate of the white community, and deaths at the hands of police also take place at about 3 times the rate. So,
Wow.
solutions we need there are community control of policing. We need to ensure that, right-wing extremists are not being rolled over into police forces. Communities should have control over hiring and firing. That is through elected police control boards,
Yeah.
so that it's not just the police protecting their own and allowing abuse to take place. As a matter of course, police need to be held accountable, um,
Yes.
and all that. There's a whole, agenda for putting an end to racially motivated police violence, as well as, the system of criminal injustice, which
Yeah.
again is, and the drug wars especially. So our drug policy basically is that substance use should be treated as a public health problem and not as a criminal problem. And we would basically reclassify cannabis, for starters, as a substance that should be legal. It should be legalized across the board in this country. And the US policy on drugs south of the border also should be changed, because that's what's driving a lot of the violence that, drives waves of immigration
Yeah.
into this country. So there's a lot we can do about the migrant crisis here, because we're causing it through really wrong-headed policies on drugs, on, overturning other democracies, chronic war, and climate change as well.
Yeah.
The migrant crisis is fixable at its source.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for the insight. I'm really asking this because, as a Palestinian, I feel a great deal of solidarity with the Black community here in the U.S. And you're probably familiar with the phrase "no justice, no peace."
Yeah.
This was historically used by the Black community in their struggle for liberation. It's a phrase that many other liberation struggles within the U.S. and around the world have adopted. This is what we see with the Palestinian struggle, right? It's an extremely important phrase that you'd hear during protests, and with all of that in mind, what does that phrase mean to you? No justice, no peace.
Yeah. Martin Luther King has a saying about this also, and I'm just paraphrasing it, but it's to the effect that, you know, peace is not just the absence of violence. Peace the is a state of justice. So, in other words, people violence, begets violence.
Yeah.
And if you want to put an end to violence, that is, if you want a system of peace, you've got to address the injustices that are driving it. And, the big myth right now is that the Palestinian struggle, began on October 7th,
Yep.
that on October 7th, suddenly, you know, Hamas, undertook this strike back that came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Well, no, there's been, just chronic and relentless violence. In fact, even before the state of Israel was established, there were over 500 Palestinian villages that were destroyed,
Yeah.
and massacre after massacre. And then at the founding of Israel, there were over 700,000 Palestinians who were ethnically cleansed.
Exactly.
So this has been almost a century of violence,
Yeah.
basically 76 years since the founding of Israel, but it began before Israel. And it's only since the 1990s that the archives of Israel, the national archives, were made available to historians, Israeli historians, who then began to clarify that Israel was founded with a very violent terrorist plan
Yeah.
to drive out the occupants of Palestine. So this wasn't just like an accident or it happened, a few things happened. This was actually built into the plan, and it was not disclosed to the public. And, but you had these terrorist groups. One of the famous acts of terrorism that got some publicity was the terrorist bombing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem that killed 100 people, mostly Europeans, as part of driving out um, uh, Great Britain from its, control over the colony
Yeah.
of Palestine. And so, there was just violence baked into this, again, from a very traumatized people, from the Zionists were very much coming out of the Holocaust and the murder of 6 million Jews. So they were extremely traumatized themselves, which drives home the point that one war crime does not justify another war crime. And
100%.
the Israelis, or yeah, I mean, Netanyahu and the Israelis are justifying their violence now based on the violence that was committed on October 7th. Well, if you're going to justify the current slaughter by October 7th, then you would have to justify October 7th by the 76 years of slaughter that preceded that. So the bottom line is that one war crime does not justify another. And to get to the bottom of the violence and the massacres, we have to stop the ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
We have to stop the occupation. We have to stop, the home destructions, the apartheid state,
Yeah.
just the routine daily violence that has been inflicted on the people of Palestine from the get-go. And yes, the Jews deserve, peace and security. Everybody deserves peace and security. We
100%.
shouldn't have to have, you know, violent ethno-states in order to achieve security. Violent ethno-states is never going to get us to security. We need international law, human rights, and peace and justice for everyone
Yeah.
in order to achieve that peace and security.
Wow. 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 Thank you so much. I mean, there are many communities in the U.S. who have been persecuted and marginalized throughout history, and that's why we have conflict and tension. It's all about the root causes of injustice. And when we say no justice, no peace, we're not saying we don't want peace. We're saying that justice is a precondition for peace. And
Exactly.
you can't have peace without addressing the injustices. Right.
Exactly.
And you touched on a lot of what I talk about during my streams, the 1948 Palestinian Nakba, where 750,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes and over 400, around 500 villages were depopulated and destroyed. The opening of the archives, the new historians, etc. And actually the archives, they opened it up like very late, like, decades later. And when a lot came out, when Israeli historians started looking into everything, they actually made it so much harder to look into it now. There was a library where all of these Israeli historians go to. I spoke to Avi Shlem about this. He's part of the new historians, and you used to be able to flip through and wherever you want, you could find whatever you want, and they made it so specific. Like you have to, they restricted access to the library even, and Netanyahu said, they didn't have enough money to keep it running or something. Like, what do you, it's a lot of BS going on, 100%. You're obviously super well informed on Palestine. So what was your first exposure to Palestine and the Palestinian cause?
Okay, so I grew up in a Jewish family, in a
Yeah.
Jewish community after the Holocaust, and my grandfather's name was Israel, and and so the family was very identified with Israel,
Mm,
and we heard the Zionist, you know, uh, story from the get-go,
yeah.
and um, it was a little bit, um, so I was involved, I was in religious school and I was in the children's choir and sang a lot of Israeli songs and things like that. But I always declined to go to Israel just because it seemed to be part of a major sales pitch that just seemed a little suspicious to me. So I did not go there and, kind of had questions about it. But it wasn't until much later that I began to actually hear about it. And it was in the 2000s, actually, once I had become part of the Green Party, that I started learning about it because the
Wow.
Greens had sort of focused on this issue for quite some time. And in 2006, the Greens adopted a position in favor of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and in support of Palestinian human rights and recognizing Israeli apartheid. So that was in 2006. And that's when I first started really learning about it, when the Green Party was dialoguing, and we had a lot of Zionists, within the Green Party as well. So there was a lot of debate and dialogue, but it was really interesting that people were persuaded. And it was just an example of how educating people and clarifying what the facts of the story are that really changed people's views. So that was a very encouraging thing. And then when I first ran for office in 2012 for a national office, I had to really understand this a whole lot better because it was part of our platform. So, it was gradually over that period of time that I came to understand, and then it was with the, um, you know, the appearance of this genocide that I really started digging in much deeper to really try to understand in detail what was going on because it,
Yeah.
it just shot to the head of the agenda
Yeah.
as, kind of uh, you know, the number one sort of emergency because we're
Yeah.
paying for this. It's not that there aren't other genocides going on, there are, but this is happening with our dollars and and our weapons. So this is
Wow.
just blood on our hands.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I mean, it's really inspiring to hear how you basically rejected the conditioning of Zionism in Israel. Israel really preys on Jewish youth in the U.S. I mean, they send like IDF soldiers as guests to student orgs at universities. It's really gross stuff. Like you said, just educating people and showing them that the truth will go a long way.
Yeah,
Um,
and I have to say that when I was growing up, it was right after the Holocaust. And
yeah.
so it was a huge issue. It was like an existential
Yeah.
crisis. Like, how could people allow this to happen? Exactly what's going on in Gaza right now. How can people sit by and allow this to happen? And that
Yeah.
was just really drilled into me. I just grew up on that it's not okay to perpetrate genocide, and it's not okay to be a bystander to genocide.
Yeah.
Neither one is okay. And I just like that's how we came to terms with the genocide. That's how we could like go on and keep living life was by affirming that we would never let this happen again. And we would not be a bystander to genocide for anybody.
Yeah.
And so for me, it just like really um it really resonates in a deep way, this struggle, not to be a bystander to genocide. But in this case, it's even worse than being a bystander to genocide because we're per we're perpetrators here. The
Yeah.
US is perpetrators. We're
Yeah.
co-perpetrators with Israel. So to me, it like violates my basic ingrained values that I grew up with that were like really essential to the recovery from genocide in my community. And, so I just, it, I find it intolerable not to be fighting this full time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, one war crime doesn't justify another. One genocide doesn't justify another. I really look up to the Jewish people in the US who realize this and say never again means never again to anyone, not just never again to me, which I think is really important. And people need to understand that. And I have another question asked by my cousin Heya from New Jersey, who is curious about your assessment about the current U.S. policy towards Israel and Palestine. What are the main changes that you would advocate for, and how should the U.S. approach the UN, United Nations resolutions regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict?
Well, we have to step up to the plate here because the president of the United States is basically in the driver's seat right now and always
Yeah.
has been with Israel.
Yeah.
And, you know, the UN Security Council just passed the ceasefire resolution that Joe Biden um, proposed, which in turn is very similar to what Hamas proposed just a couple of weeks ago. And Hamas has agreed to this, Israel has not.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that the president is in control here. The president has always been in control. And when Ronald Reagan said to Israel in the 1980s, call off your troops, end the massacre going on in Lebanon, stop the missile strikes, it happened right then.
Yeah.
Phone call, done. Same thing with Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s, um, to Egypt, no, to Israel and to the UK and France, I think, who had all invaded Egypt.
Hmm.
And so, there the president said as much, and all those countries said, okay, and that was with Dwight Eisenhower. Because the US is funding this, because Israel depends on US armaments, on the rockets for the Iron Dome, all that, we are in complete control. So the UN resolution most recently got passed, but Israel's not going to budge. They're not going to budge unless they're made to comply.
Yeah.
And, they also have nuclear weapons. So it's not like troops are going to go make them. We can make them, by the president has the authority and the power to do that. Now, to the credit of our movement, we have forced his hand. We forced Biden's hand because he was interfering with the UN Security Council resolutions. Now he's proposing them. That's great,
Yeah.
but it doesn't make it happen. So, you know, it's like Frederick Douglass is saying, power concedes nothing without a demand. The way to intensify that demand right now, in my view, is politically, by our getting on the ballot, by everyone doing what they can right now to make sure that we're on in Illinois and Indiana, which are two really very important states, by our ensuring that we are on the ballot in every state. That is going to force Biden's hand. If anything is, it's the political reality that that we
Yeah.
are getting organized and that this movement is powering us.
Yeah.
That can drive him. And I think is our best immediate strategy for ending this. The longer term strategy is that Israel has to comply, not just to stop the genocide. They have to end the occupation of Gaza and the other occupied territories. They have to end the apartheid. They have to end the ethnic cleansing. So this is going to take a lot of, negotiations and dialogue as to you know,
Yeah.
exactly how this is going to happen, but we know what has to happen, and we know it's got to get started. And in my view, there should be an economic boycott. We need to end the flow of weapons. It's actually illegal for the U.S. to be supplying Israel with weapons now in any event.
Yeah.
Um, it violates three different sets of laws. Uh, you can't provide weapons to a country that's interfering with humanitarian aid, a country that's violating human rights, and a country that is violating nuclear weapons treaties. And Israel is in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So it's actually illegal for the president to approve the weapons and for Congress to authorize them. So there are many reasons for them to stop it. But the bottom line is that the president can do it and we have to make him do it. And that's not a simple fix, it's not a soundbite. It's like a strategy. We really have to keep growing our power and our political presence. This is, basically what our political strategy is in this campaign. And you know, the worse the genocide gets, the more critical it makes it,
Yeah.
for us to stand up and just really
Uh,
double down on building our political power right now.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really crazy. It's all for show, in my opinion. Like you said, we literally have to force them to make these changes. And that's why I'm a very big supporter of the BDS movement: boycott, divest, and sanction. It's a grassroots way for average people to take matters into their own hands. And Heya also wants to know what your stance is on the BDS movement, and if you think it's even an effective way to address this conflict.
It absolutely is. And we've seen, what it did, to Starbucks. Starbucks really felt the heat. Now, have they
Yeah.
changed their policy yet? I don't think so, but they are having to face the music economically. And they stated that it was really because of the global, um, decline in their sales. So it's really been a global movement. And in my view, this movement, BDS, has to be expanded. And
Oh yeah.
I think it should be adopted as a national strategy, as an
Yes.
international strategy. I think it really takes the community of the world that really has to force Israel's hand. Israel's not going to do this by itself.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people are demanding that elections be held right now and are, want to challenge Netanyahu. That's a good thing. A lot of people are supporting in Israel now, are supporting a ceasefire and, an arrangement that would include releasing the hostages. So that's all good. Um, but, that alone doesn't mean an end to ethnic cleansing and occupation and apartheid. So, I think we want to build on that. We want to be working with the human rights groups that are in Israel, because there is definitely, it's a portion of Israel. It's not a majority, that's for sure. It's a
Yeah.
small portion. Israel has become this horrific, racist, murderous society and very hateful. It's just kind of shocking to see what's, acceptable behavior now in Israel. It's really scary. It's kind of a fascist state. Um, but it has elements of real wisdom and humanity there, like Miko Peled, for example, from the
Yeah.
military family. Um, you know, uh,
Son of the general.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. And, there are very wonderful human rights groups in Israel as well. So there's definitely people that we badly need to work in alliance with to help move Israeli society, um, to where it needs to go.
Yeah, well, no, 100%. We need to expand the BDS movement and collaborate with other grassroots organizations in Israel slash Palestine, and the U.S. And abroad to take matters in our own hands. For years, you've been on the ground, participating in protests and mass mobilizations. In fact, you've actually been unjustly arrested a few times, right? I have a question from Yazan, a journalist student from NYU, who wants to know what your stance is on the recent crackdown on pro-Palestinian demonstrations on college campuses. Do you think students and faculty are within their rights to exercise free speech, or do the schools have the right to deploy law enforcement?
So I think that students and faculty are not only within their rights to exercise their constitutional rights of free speech and the right to demonstrate for redress of grievances. These are our constitutional rights. These are not illegal. And the encampments,
Yeah,
almost entirely were within the rules of their campus,
yeah,
and we're not obstructing classes, and we're very we're courteous, we're interfaith, and we're respectful. Certainly the encampments that I visited were not a threat to anybody. They might threaten an ideology, they might threaten genocide, they might threaten, the practice of ethnic cleansing. But that's a dialogue that has to be had. And they
yeah,
weren't, there was nothing violent in what they were doing. Words are not violent. And, our campuses should be exactly where this happens. This is where debate and discussion and accountability has to happen. So I think students were not only within their rights, they were exercising their responsibility. They are the conscience of the nation, and they are supported by not only the International Court of Justice and the ruling of the International Criminal Court and one United Nations General Assembly resolution after another, and then a couple of the Security Council resolutions too. So they were really, and they are expressing the highest values of humanity, our shared values, which our elected officials are at war with. They are at war with our higher values, and they are not only cracking down on students in unjustified, horrific, provoked violence. And my hope is that they are going to be dragged into court, and they probably will, both
yeah.
the police as well as the campuses, for um, really
Inshallah.
abusing the rights of students. So
Yeah,
you see settlements in these kinds of, abusive police practices all the time. You see settlements where cities have to pay, and police departments have to pay, and the colleges are likely to be implicated in these court cases too. Some of the footage is just
It's
appalling. It's
crazy.
unbelievable. In the demonstration at Washington University where I was arrested, I mean, our treatment was really appalling. Um, but even worse than our treatment was a university professor, Stephen Tamari, who is a Middle Eastern professor from the University of Illinois, who was there in sympathy, just taking pictures. They didn't
Yeah.
want this documented, and they had this coordinated assault by four cops who charged him at once, beat
Wow.
him. He was lying apparently unconscious on the ground, and then they dragged him to where they thought they were out of range of the camera, and then they started knee dropping on him. Grown, big-bodied male
Yeah.
adults were doing knee drops onto his stomach and his rib cage, and
Yeah.
he wound up, and then he and I uh, were both separated off from the other people who were arrested. We were both charged with assault. We were
Wow.
assaulted and we were charged with assault. And
Wow.
so I saw him after this happened, and he was just kind of dragging himself around. We were separated off like that we were going to be admitted to the jail.
Yeah.
When everybody else was let out, we were then sent into
Yeah.
this corridor, down this other corridor, and we were processed for admission to the jail. And they wound up then letting us go. But I did have a chance to talk with him, and he had no idea why he was assaulted. And then I saw the footage of him being assaulted, and it was like, it was like, just horrible,
Yeah.
horrifying,
Yeah.
awful. And he then wound up being hospitalized for several days, having 10 broken ribs and a badly
Wow.
broken wrist that was going to require surgery as well. This
Wow.
is what they do. These are
Yeah.
police forces in St. Louis that have been trained by the Israeli occupation forces. And this
Yeah.
is commonplace now around the country.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
this is the flip side of genocide in Gaza is the assault on our democracy here at home
Yeah.
and the assault on our basic civil liberties, the militarization of our police forces. They're being weaponized with military equipment through this so-called 1033 program that moves excess military equipment down into uh, cities and towns, police forces, tanks and drones and tasers and all the things that have been used and were used on various campuses across the country. So I say big shout out to all the students who are standing up for our civil liberties, our civil rights, and our responsibility, to demand that we have a democracy here and that we not be occupied and abused by police forces in collusion with colleges who have various investments in, in the fossil fuels too, but in particular, with the weapons profiteers. This is just
Yeah.
a disgrace.
Yeah. 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 No, it's really crazy that we're suddenly debating about the right to protest.
Mhm.
Both the Democrats and Republicans are essentially against the protests that we've been seeing on campus. It's very, very hypocritical, in my opinion. I mean, I've seen these protests myself, and like you said, they are a peaceful, they're peaceful and nonviolent. And in fact, the only violence we've seen are the counter protests and bad actors or police going into the encampments, assaulting and harassing people, like you mentioned, from what you've seen. Right? I mean, there's been a lot of, a lot of protests going on, and we just keep seeing, um, just protesters getting, constantly harassed and assaulted, and the counter protesters, nothing is happening to them. Like the police are defending them, if anything. It's
Mhm.
it's really crazy to see.
I mean, it reminds me, it's like a lesser case of the violence in the West Bank, where you have the
Yeah.
police, the Israeli Defense Forces are there to protect the settlers who are, showing up with their guns and are robbing these families and destroying their homes and burning their crops and killing their sheep, and just physically then destroying their water supplies. And the police are there to just as enforcers.
Yeah.
It's just horrifying, and the
Yeah.
world will not stand for it. And the more the word gets out, the more people are mobilized to make this go away. It's
Yeah.
got to stop.
100%. When I see protesters get arrested, and then there's protests outside of the jails waiting for them to come out, it really reminds me of footage I've seen from back home in Palestine. I mean, it's just like what is going on? Like it's really insane. I mean, there's been a lot of discourse over the freedom of speech and right to protest. Just under 2 months ago, the Supreme Court declined to hear the case McKesson versus Doe, right? Which could have been, it could have had major implications for protest protections under the First Amendment. Do you have any opinions on the Supreme Court's decision and its implications? And how would your administration protect the rights of protesters and activists?
So I'm not familiar with that particular case, and thank you for bringing it to my attention, and I will take a look at it.
Yeah.
Because, we are just seeing now case after case where, the Supreme Court is on the wrong side of history,
Yeah.
and where our basic democratic rights and institutions are all going in the wrong direction. So you recently had the renewal of the FISA Act, for example, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act got renewed without, any amendments, because it's known that it is used, it's abused. It's supposed to be, collecting intelligence on threats to U.S. security who are overseas, but it's used routinely against activists in this country. And that, we're supposed to be protected by, no warrantless searches. That's just part of our constitutional rights. So that's violated. We're seeing cop cities built all over the place where basically police are being trained in violent and abusive techniques, often trained by the Israeli occupation forces.
Yeah.
So we're seeing the military draft now, which was reinstated a couple of years ago, and now it's been automated. Well, I should say it's about to be automated so that everyone's going to be automatically registered for the draft. This is males, although they're trying to extend it to women as well. Starting at age 18, people are going to be automatically registered now for the draft, which
Yes.
then the president can declare an emergency.
That's crazy.
Boom, there you go. Oh, you're off to go conduct a genocide in
Yeah.
in Gaza or whatever. So, our democracy is being stolen from us. And
What kind of democracy is that? I mean, it's just,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's awful. And we're seeing incredible corruption at the courts as well. Like with Stephen Donziger, for example. I don't know if you followed him. He's an environmental activist who defended the indigenous people in Ecuador. And I think it was Chevron, the company that, he obtained a like $10 billion, maybe $7 billion fine for Chevron having poisoned the indigenous people, ruined their water supply, created these cancer clusters. Through their dumping. Chevron just dumped their oil waste into the water supplies and pollutes the fish. And, Don did great work. And so the courts basically created their own corporate court because New York refused to try him. So they created a corporate court. It's like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
It's just outrageous. And the congressional representatives from his district are just silent about it in the same way that, the morons in Congress are silent about this genocide. And they invited Netanyahu to come and speak.
Yeah.
Come on. Let's just strip these war criminals of their public office. They should be removed from office as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And furthermore, let me just say that part of what we will do on day one, is not only end the flow of weapons, because the president has the power to do that on day one. We also have the power to break up the consolidated corporate media, because it's for lack of having a watchdog media. Media should be watchdogs, not lapdogs. Now they're lapdogs. So the public is denied a real understanding of, the realities of our world, like the genocide, for example, and what's been going on there for a long time. We have this very compliant media that basically participates in the propaganda campaigns conducted by the Department of Defense and the State Department. And so we, we on day one will begin to break up the corporate consolidated media and undertake an antitrust suit so that, again, we can have a diversified press that actually does real journalism again.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
And this can be done under the power of the executive. Oh, and the other thing I should mention too is
yeah.
having congressional hearings. So we can have meaningful congressional hearings. They've basically been, reduced to just these petty partisan little feuds
Yeah.
and, just play acting that takes place now before the cameras. No, we can start having really meaningful
Yeah.
hearings again. But you were going to say,
100%.
interrupted you.
No, no, you're good. You're good. You're good. No, I think everything you're saying is 100%. I agree with, I mean, just going back to the freedom of speech, I mean, I support freedom of speech, even if I mean, of course, right? Even if I don't agree with what you're saying, you have the right to go and protest, as long as it's not hateful and as long as you're not hurting people. And what's hateful about wanting an end to the occupation? What's hateful about wanting an end to the apartheid, to the oppression, the humiliation of the Palestinian people for the past 76 years, right? The encampments, they remind me of the 2018 Gaza March of Return, which are the non-violent protesters at the Gaza border in 2018, 2019, that were met with brutal Israeli retaliation. The media was especially complicit in justifying Israel's actions because they portrayed the peaceful, non-violent protests as a Hamas invasion. This was CNN, Fox News, etc. I mean, we're living in the time of the 24-hour news cycle where truth has become subjective, and the only thing that matters in journalism nowadays is who gets there first. It's crazy. Do you have a message? Do you have a message to the mainstream media specifically about Palestine? In your opinion, what is good journalism?
Reporting the facts without regard to the the talking points that the Department of Defense and the Secretary of State are issuing.
Yeah.
We need real investigative journalism. We need a real press that is doing its job. That's why Julian Assange is sitting in jail right now. He did his job. He exposed, corruption, fraud, and abuse, war crimes, torture. He exposed it. That should be the model of what the press is doing. You're supposed to be a watchdog, not a lapdog, just practicing careerism and trying to land, the interview with some, big, important elected official. That's not your job, then that doesn't serve the American people. The First Amendment is the first for a reason, because our democracy really depends on freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom to protest. That's what led to the really valuable things about American democracy. American democracy was born, in opposition to, to an aristocracy and a very, repressive occupation, essentially.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we were part of that as the colonists. We were colonizing the indigenous people. So it's, kind of a bittersweet tale. But the good part of it, was really articulating what the essential freedoms should be. And then those freedoms have to be extended to everybody. But yes, that's what we need the mainstream media to be doing. And we desperately need that right now.
100%. I think, I thank you so much. Seriously, I think the press sector has been on the decline for years. The government has started punishing people for literally exposing the truths. Whistleblower figures like Edward Snowden. It's all interlinked in my opinion. I mean, like you said, these are the values of which American democracy was founded on. Which is, with all of this in mind, it becomes very challenging for the average person to stay informed and care about Palestine. And I actually have a question from my other cousin, Mu'taz, who's a pre-law student at Rutgers in New Jersey. Why should Americans care about Palestine since the interests of Israel and the U.S. governments are aligned?
Well, um, because international law matters, human rights matters. What we're seeing in Palestine is normalizing torture and murder of children on an industrial scale. And, so for one thing, if you have a beating heart, and a living soul, this should horrify you to the core.
Yeah,
So it shouldn't be a question of what we should do. It's like if you are not, um, uh, tormented by this, something is wrong with you.
yeah,
Where's your humanity? And, I feel very sorry for people who are closed off from this. But even set aside what human rights and values should be about. The reality is that the US has been top dog for quite some time. Since the Second World War, the US has been in the business of overturning governments all over the world. 70 some regime change operations we've conducted. And since the fall of the Soviet Union, we have been the unopposed empire since the 1990s, the early 90s. We have been
yeah,
the unopposed empire, basically writing the rules. It's now the rules-based order rather than international law. The rules-based order is like what the US wants to do at that particular moment, and it changes from day to day. Rules-based order means basically Washington, D.C. decides. But you know what? That kind of a world order is a real problem if you're no longer top dog. And we're not top dog anymore. It's taking a while for uh, our economic and political elites to understand that. But the reality is that the GDP of the BRICS
mm,
alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and some Middle Eastern countries now too,
yeah,
their combined GDP is actually exceeding that of the US and our allies. So they are the ascendant economic force now, and the US and company are in decline in part because of our expanded militarism and things that go with that. It's really
yeah,
kind of squandering our resources. So the uh, this is not working, and why we should care about Gaza is that what goes in Gaza doesn't stay in Gaza. And when you're no longer top dog, you could be subjected to this too, that a more powerful force may befall us. And we're going to need international law as a member of the global community when we are no longer calling the shots, which we're not. We are an empire in rather rapid decline right now. So, for our own self-interest, we can't allow the monstrosity in Gaza to be the way of the world.
yeah,
We really have to fight for a world that serves all of us, and we need to be a team player, not the bully in the schoolyard, and part of developing, further developing a more just, body of international law and institutions that can support, peace and justice and human rights for everyone.
for everyone. 100%. Wow, thank you so much for that. At this point, I think we're around an hour and a half. We're at the hour and a half mark. I've really, really loved our conversation so far, and I think I've learned a great deal, and I hope the audience did as well.
Great.
I mentioned this last time we spoke, but I really think that you'd be the most genuine and transparent president that we've ever had. Like a president that I would actually be proud of, you know? And I really wish that we could talk more, and I think we'll do it again some other time, I hope. But I think it's getting pretty late where you are right now. I think you're probably an hour ahead of me, so I won't keep you for much longer. But we can end with this question: what does a vote for Jill Stein actually mean beyond its functionality? What message are we sending to the system with a vote for Stein?
I think we are sending a system, a signal to the empire that we are strong, we are getting together across the different silos of our issues and our commitments. We are coming together around a vision of human rights and international law and justice to put an immediate end to genocide and an end to endless war, that we are moving beyond empire. Empire is in a state of collapse, actually, to look at the last many wars that the empire has fought. The empire is impoverishing us. It consumes half of our budget. It denies us the healthcare, the housing, and the education that we need, the climate adaptations that we need immediately. It's denying us this so that we can, basically set the rest of the world on fire. This is a disaster for all of us. And we are getting together to demand that we have an America and a world that works for us all, and that we, the people, have a voice, a critical role in defining our future and in restoring the promise of American democracy, which is on life support at the moment. So, it's like a choice between, going over the cliff or actually resurrecting the future that we deserve. And that's what we're saying. A vote for me is a vote for the only anti-war, anti-genocide, pro-worker climate emergency campaign that's going to be on the ballot across the country. And I would urge you right now, if you want to have the option to have an anti-genocide vote, to go to my website, jillstein2024.com, and help us in the petition drive. If you can't get there, if it's not in your state, then make a contribution, throw in whatever you can. If it's $5, that's great. Small contributions are really what powers us. That is the engine. And that will help us lock in to this power that we have and this deep change that we need right now, immediately. There are 1 million lives in Gaza right now that the UN Food Program says they are going to die in the next month. We need to send a signal to Washington, to Congress, and especially to our president right now. By getting on the ballot, he needs to know that we are strong, we're getting organized, we're not going away, and he needs to move right now. He needs to move now for the sake of his legacy, to keep him out of The Hague, and to prevent the arrest warrant that will be coming for him too, because he is also responsible for this. There are an additional 1 million people whose lives are on the line right now. He needs to act, and by our getting organized, by voting for our campaign, but also by joining our campaign right now, this is just changing our political destiny, and it is providing that push that our elected officials need right now to start doing the right thing.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Stein, for the conversation. I really hope that we can talk again soon, and I really think we will before your election. It was a pleasure speaking to you, seriously, and I really wish you luck in the election. As a Palestinian, it really warms my heart that someone like you speaking in support of my people and using your platform to further our liberation, and not just the liberation of my people, but the liberation of all oppressed people. Black liberation, indigenous liberation, workers' liberation, etc. And I hope that I was able to help expand your platform tonight with this interview and introduce you and your name to my followers and everyone watching. And just to echo once again what you've said, everyone watching, please go to jillstein2024.com and learn more about Dr. Stein's platform. And donate and be up to date with everything, and everyone in chat, I want you to respond with voting green in the chat right now. I need everyone to comment voting green in the comments right now. I need to see that flying both on YouTube and on TikTok. I want to see it. Once again, Dr. Stein, thank you so much for your time. And again, from the bottom of my heart, good luck to your campaign.
Thank you. My honor. It's really been great talking with you, Hamza, and I look forward to the next conversation soon. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stein. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. We are done. My face cam is not available, unfortunately. But I hope you guys did enjoy that and learned something from that. The link is in my description down below if you're watching this on YouTube. go to Jill Stein 2024.com. And please, seriously, I encourage everyone to learn more about Dr. Stein's platform. Every single vote counts. Every single vote matters. And you do not have to, debate on who to vote for, whether it's Trump or Biden. I mean, those are not the only options here. They're not. They're really not. And I think if we all work together, we can seriously make a difference here and see some actual change in this world. Everyone, once again, JillStein2024.com. The link is in my bio. We need everyone to check this out. And if once again, if you're not in the U.S., because I know I have a very large international viewership, please share this stream, because I'm keeping this posted on YouTube after it's over. So if you're watching this on TikTok, you will see this over on YouTube for the full thing. My YouTube is just Hamza Saada, my full name. And I really do, once again, encourage everyone to visit the link in my description on YouTube, and I will add that link, in the future to my bio on TikTok when I post clips about it, and especially on Instagram. So yeah, I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Share the stream out, because I'm keeping this up. Share this out to people that may not know who Jill Stein is, and let's help Dr. Stein get on the ballot in every state and actually have a chance at getting this win and seeing some actual change in this world. This is what we need. Not only Palestine. This is what the world needs. It really is. Okay. Thank you guys so much. As always, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one. Free Palestine.